Hello and welcome to this video. I'm going to talk about the major tech stocks: Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, NVDA, and others, just to see what they're telling us. So I'm going to start off with Tesla. Tesla was down over 10% this week, partly because this sector, Tesla is part of the discretionary sector. This sector has been selling off. Let's just have a quick look at the sector. Excel wise, they take a symbol for discretionary. You can see that this sector has been selling off. Now, we've had the Fed meeting this week, and during the meeting, Federal Reserve Chairman Powell said that he expects interest rate to go up one more time before the end of the year. Market was hoping that Federal Reserve would pause, would not raise interest rate further this year, but he came out and said that no, there would be one more rate increases because inflation is still too high. As a result, the market didn't like it and sold off. Now, discretionary stocks in particular, because if the interest rates in the market, interest rates would now have to be reset upwards. Mortgage rates, interest rates on car loans, credit cards, they would all have to go up. Plus, we've got student loans starting. The effect of all of this is that people are now going to have less money to spend on discretionary items, non-essential items. And that's why this sector is selling off. Tesla and Amazon are the two biggest stocks in this sector, along with Home Depot and others. And that's why you see Tesla, fell over 10% this week. Now, if you look at the structure, so it traded between this zone before and then broke out and achieved a full measured move of this distance. And since then, it's been pulling back, but it wasn't able to hold this level. This was the previous area of resistance. Ideally, it should have done that. Instead, it broke to the downside and it closed just above the previous low right here, which is around 242. In the process, it also fell below these two moving averages, the daily 20 and 50 moving averages. So the price action now is beginning to look weak. From a momentum point of view, you can see RSI has closed below 50. MACD is crossed. If MACD falls below the zero line, that would be negative, something like this. It's not, we're not there yet, but you can see it has crossed, and the question is whether, it's going to fall below the zero line. If so, then I would expect further weakness in Tesla. If I look at the weekly chart of Tesla, so obviously this is the big weekly candle, but from a weekly perspective, you can see that the price still is above the weekly 20 and 50 EMA, these two lines. So which is positive for now, and weekly RSI remains above the 50 level. So on a weekly basis, despite this big decline, everything's okay for the time being, but I'm watching to see whether the weekly will deteriorate, because I'm seeing weakness on the daily. So if the weakness continues, eventually it will affect the weekly technicals. In terms of what I expect from Tesla, if there is a rebound, I expect Tesla to have problem between 257 and 260. 260 is this previous level, and 257 is where this moving average is, the blue line. That's around 257.50. So those would be the areas I would expect resistance, and maybe Tesla does something like this and breaks below this level. In which case, I would expect downside target to be somewhere around here, which is between 225 to 227. The other reason why this level is relevant is, you see the weekly moving averages. The second moving average, the pink one, is around 227.5. So these two moving averages, should act as support. So that's why, if there is a pullback, that would be my downside target between 225 and 227. So any rebound has a resistance, and then Tesla does something like this. So that's basically what I'm thinking. But if on the other hand, if it's able to go above 260 and then retests and does that, then obviously it negates any probability of further weakness on the downside. And obviously during that time, RSI has to reclaim, probably retest and do that. That would be bullish. But if RSI gets rejected at the 50 level, if there's any rebound, that would be negative. Something like this. You see right here, it came up to 50, rejected, and eventually, managed to get through the 50 level. You can see rejection at the 50 level. So I'm watching to see whether or not it reclaims the 50 level or it gets rejected from the 50 level on the RSI. So that's Tesla. If I look at Amazon next, as I said, Amazon and Tesla are in the same sector. So what do we see in Amazon? Similar story, big decline so far. This was the previous swing low. It has breached that level. The moving averages are now beginning to roll to the downside. During this uptrend, you can see that the moving averages were going up. Price never closed underneath the daily 50 EMA. Right now, the price is underneath both of them. Momentum indicators are weak. You can see RSI is well below the 50 level. MACD is now about to cross below the zero line. So on a daily basis, it's beginning to look weak to me. So if I look at the weekly chart of Amazon, so right here, so if I remove the moving averages, you can see that the price has closed underneath the previous weekly low right here. So this is negative, but RSI remains above the 50 level. And if I bring in the weekly moving averages, you can see that it closed right at the weekly 20, but above the weekly 50. So I would say that it's more neutral at this point. It's not positive only because it has established a lower low on a weekly basis, but it remains above the moving averages and as well as RSI 50 level. So I'm calling it a neutral. It will turn negative if price closes underneath both of the moving averages as well as RSI closing below the 50 level. And if it does something like this, this will turn outright negative. But we're not there yet. One step at a time. So weekly is okay. I'm watching to see what happens going forward. But I think a probable scenario is a rebound because it's quite oversold. Resistance would be at these two moving averages. Let me give you the numbers. 136.60 is the top one, the blue one. And the bottom one is 134.50. So those would be the levels I would expect resistance to be. And if it fails to overcome those, then I could easily see doing something like this. This is basically 121 thereabouts. This level is effectively, you take this range, a full measured move of this range is this number, this level right here. So that's how I'm arriving at this level. And on a weekly basis, 121 basically brings it to this weekly 50 EMA, the pink line. There it is, 121.66. So that's the level on the weekly basis, and on a daily basis, a full measured move of this range is the 121. So that's how I get my levels. So that's Amazon. Let's move on to Apple. So let me just hide these lines first. You can see that since falling below these moving averages right here, it has failed to overcome these two daily moving averages, and now you can see that they're acting as resistance. So long as these two price remains under these moving averages, I would expect maybe more downside. The odds of further downside is higher. You can see that RSI is below the 50. It hasn't been able to reclaim the 50. MACD is underneath the zero line. So both the price action momentum indicators look weak to me. On a weekly basis, what do we see? Here's Apple. on a weekly basis, you can see that it hasn't formed a new swing low. This was the previous weekly low. It hasn't fallen below this level, so that's good. So we can't yet call it a weekly lower high. For that to happen, it needs to go underneath this level. But price remains underneath the weekly 20, but above the weekly 50. RSI, you can see, is hanging around the 50 level. Question is this going to do something like this, or is this going to fall below and then rejection at this level? This is bearish, this is bullish. This would be something similar to here, where it fell, it tried to come up, got rejected, and then fall again, and we get this decline. Or if it does that, it would be similar to like this. You have a double bottom right here. So the question is this going to be a double bottom, or is it going to be a lower high? We'll have to wait and see. Now, if I go back to the daily, let's look at some of the levels. All right, so I'm just going to zoom out so you can see the levels. So you can see that it's been trading between these two zones right here. So this one is, the top of them is around 180.50, and the bottom is around 170, let's call it 174. If it breaks to the downside, a full measured move of this distance is this level. This is what? This level is around 167. Okay, if I go to the weekly, why is 167 relevant? It's relevant because this weekly 50 is around 168. So that basically means that it'll come back and test the weekly 50. So based on this range, it's projecting me a downside target to that weekly 50. Now, sometimes it doesn't give you the full measured move, it gives you the half measured move. The half measured move is this level right here, which is around 170. So on the downside, I'm watching 170 and 167.50. And on the upside, the first level I'm watching is this level. You see this candle right here, this candle's high. And eventually this 180 level. So between 177.50 and 180 is a resistance zone. Only if it moves above these moving averages, it will start to look positive. But otherwise 180 is the upside zone. 174 is the downside zone. You break up this level, full measured move 167.50, half measured move 170. So that's that's Apple. But as I said, on a daily basis, momentum indicators, price action are weak. So it is entirely possible that we could see further weakness. But if it is able to rally and get back above this moving average on a daily basis, and RSI reclaims this 50 level, then downside risk diminishes. Okay, Microsoft next. So on a daily basis, what do we see? Similar story, move up and then gradually moving lower. It has fallen below the moving averages right here, the daily 20 and 50. Big drop in price. And then if I look at the moving average momentum indicators, they're all similar. It's similar to the other ones. RSI below the 50, MACD is crossing below the zero line. So price action momentum indicators negative at the moment, but oversold. On a weekly basis, let's see. On a weekly basis, if I just remove the moving averages so you can see, it hasn't fallen below this previous weekly low. So that's one positive. I mean, if it does that, then obviously what happens is that we have a weekly lower high. Ever since Microsoft bottom, you can see sequence of higher highs. But if it closes underneath this level, which is 311, then what happens is that we have a confirmed weekly lower high, and that is going to be a change in trend, something to be aware of. RSI closed right at the 50, so this is cutting it very, very close. So further weakness is going to push RSI below the 50 level, and look at the weekly MACD is moving lower. So I would say that this is, although the price hasn't broken below this level, the momentum indicators are, I would say they're not looking all that strong to me. But this would be the level I'm watching, 3 level, at least on a weekly basis. Now, if I bring in the moving averages, you can see that it is below the weekly 20, but the weekly 50 is still quite a ways below. So it's still it's above the the weekly 50. Coming back to the daily, so let's discuss some of the levels. So as I said, on a daily basis, it's oversold. So I would expect some kind of a bounce. If there is a bounce, this area is 325 would be an area where I see problem, and then the other one is where the daily 20 and 50 moving averages are. So this is around 328. So I would say between 325 and 328 is a problem area, this zone right here. If it's able to overcome this, then that's great, but there is a good chance that we could get a rejection. If there's a rejection, this is an important level. You see this candle, this is a very indecision candle. So the top of the candle could be a rejection zone, and if this level, the bottom is broken, then a full measured move is this level right here. So one possibility is it does that. So the bottom is 305. Now I have this other level which is 300. See, it started falling from this level until this level. So if you take this distance, full measured move of this distance is this level right here, 300. So I see support between 305 and 300, and I see resistance between 325 and 327, 328. Those would be the resistance zone, and this is the support zone. Why is 300 important? If you look at the weekly, the 300 is where the weekly 50 is sitting right here, which is this number, the pink number right here, because it has already lost the weekly 20. So if it falls further, so this would be the first level, 311, and then this would be the next weekly important level. You don't want price to be underneath both of these moving averages. Then we're talking about 2022 again. So the question is whether this is going to be the beginning of the 2022, when RSI is also fallen below the 50 level and then continues to remain underneath the 50 level. We don't know that, but I'm watching to see whether this is the beginning of the 2022 or whether it does that and then says, okay, thank you very much, now let's move higher, and RSI starts to move higher. It could do that. But at least on a daily basis, I'm seeing some weakness, but these are the levels I'm watching. Okay, NVDA next. So NVDA, you can see that has fallen off quite a bit. No surprise, because we all know that it had a massive run up and it had to give back. So what do we see right now? Let's look at the weekly. I don't need to say that daily price action momentum indicators are weak and negative. There's no question about it. Let's look at the weekly chart just to see what do we see. So one of the areas I was expecting. Let me just hide this. One of the areas, one of the level I was expecting NVDA to pull back was to this weekly 20 EMA, because I said that it has a history of touching the weekly 20 EMA. And it came very close to it. I think the Friday's low was 409.80, and the weekly 20 EMA is at 407. So it came within a couple of points of that level. And I said that having fallen this much on a daily basis, it is oversold. So I would expect some kind of a bounce. So let's look at what I see happening in NVIDIA, relate the daily to the weekly. So because NVIDIA is quite oversold, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a bounce. if there is a bounce, I see problem at this zone 440. You can see the daily moving averages are beginning to curl. You can see there was also this it was the low for this candle, and when this candle broke that level, it went on to fall to this level. So I would expect that if there is any rally, this rally would struggle in this zone 440 to 445, which is where these two moving averages is. And then from there, maybe there is another leg down, which brings it down to a lower level. The possible lower level could be around this level, which could be around this level right here, which is around 380. So I don't think the selling is quite over. If you look at the weekly chart, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So this is obviously the one level I was expecting, which is fine. But the other thing that is of concern to me is that the gap between these two moving averages is still quite wide. Anytime you see gap wide like that, it's not sustainable. You can see that right here we had the gap was widening, and then we had a correction. Price fell to this weekly 50. It does touch the weekly 50. I'm not saying that it's going to fall to weekly 50 yet. I think what could happen is that price could fall below a lower level, say something like this, and then as it consolidates, the weekly 20 begins to curl, and the weekly 50 starts to rise, and then the gap narrows. So I'm not saying that it's going to fall all the way to the weekly 50. It can, I don't know. That would be too big of a drop, but I think the possibility exists that it falls underneath the weekly 20 and then consolidates, and this basically starts to pull down the weekly 20, and the weekly 50 starts to rise, and then the gap narrows, because I still think that this gap is too wide. Either it corrects through price or it corrects through time, meaning it falls like this and then it just doesn't do anything, and it catches and it allows the moving averages to catch up with one another. So that's how I see it when I look at the weekly chart. So on a daily basis too, because they're oversold, I would expect some bounce and then do something like this. 400 would be the first target, and then possibly to run this level around 380. So that's how I see NVDA. Meta, right? So let's have a look at the weekly of Meta just to see what do we see. Now on a weekly basis, you can see that after this big run up, pull back, and then we're here. The question is whether it's gonna continue to move higher or whether it's gonna do something like this. We don't know that. But if I bring in my levels, so you can see that this area, this is the 300 level, has been a problem area. If you take this high and this low, the midpoint of this range is 300. It hasn't been able to close above 300. So I'm seeing, it continue to struggle. So eventually, it may do something like this. If so, the first level would be this level, which is around 275. But I'm not sure that it stops right there. It's entirely possible that it undercuts this 275 level. But I would say that overall, Meta's weekly pattern is strongest of all the other ones, because it's still above the weekly 20 EMA. All the others have, if you look at Microsoft is under the weekly 20, Apple is under the weekly 20, NVDA because it has had a huge run up, Amazon is at the weekly 20. So in that respect, Meta is well above the weekly 20, but I think there's a good chance that it tests that. So this would be the next level, 280. So that's how I see Meta. Let's say Google, weekly basis, it's still looking quite good. Moving averages are moving higher. It's still above the moving averages. RSI is above the 50. Let's have a look at the daily just to see, you know. So on a daily basis, you can clearly see that there is some weakness creeping in. Um, you know, price has closed below this previous swing low. So this used to be the previous trading zone. So it has fallen below this level. So a full measured move would project a target to this level. So what is this level? So this level is around 128. 128. Where is the price? 131. Also note that it's now sitting right at the weekly 50. If it falls underneath, then it will be underneath these two moving averages. You can see RSI has fallen below the 50. MACD is falling. It still is above the zero line. If MACD starts to do that and falls below the zero line, so that would suggest more weakness in Google. But I would say that Google is better. I mean, although it's looking weak, but it's not as weak as the other stocks. The weekly is still in much better shape because you can see it's still holding above the weekly 20. RSI is above the 50. So I think there is a little bit more room for pullback. Maybe it can pull back to the weekly 20, which is around 126. What was this what was this level? This is around 128. So 128 to 126. 126 is basically where the weekly 20 is. So that would be the level I would be keeping an eye on to see whether or not it can hold that level. So that's Google. And lastly, we'll look at Netflix. So let's look at the daily chart of Netflix and then we'll come back to the weekly. Now, Netflix has been selling off, So in terms of zone, so this is basically the big zone, big level from here to here. And then we see a break of this level. And now it's underneath this level. So the question is whether it's going to do a full measured move or whether it's going to do a half measured move. Half measured move brings us to this level right here, which is around 370. But it is quite oversold, so I would expect some kind of a bounce. If there is a bounce, then this area would be a possible resistance zone. If not, definitely these two moving averages. Where are they? They're around 410 to 415. So it could very well do something like this and then either go to this level or the full measured move, whichever it is. So we'll keep an eye on this level, which is where some previous resistance is. This is, as I said, 370. So let's look at the weekly chart and then let's